Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight I want to welcome Marc Masters to the show. He is the author of High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape. We're going to talk cassettes, we're going to talk about the book. Ernesto's here as well, so let's get started.
Talking bands that no one talks about. Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight we have Marc Masters in the house. Marc is the author of High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape. This book was released in October of 2023, and it essentially covers everything you ever wanted to know about the history of the cassette. It's a wonderful read. We've got Marc here. We are gonna talk cassettes, ladies and gentlemen. Marc, welcome to the show. It's nice to see you. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This is going to be a blast. And tonight, Ernesto's joining me, and we're just going to kind of tag team and bounce off each other, and we're just going to have a loose discussion, talk about the book, talk about cassettes. Before we were recording, we were talking to Marc, and I was saying, I've got a lot of cassettes. I've got a lot of history. I told him I don't want to admit out loud that I collect cassettes, sealed cassettes, but I do. But we have had various cassette topics in the warehouse, so this just goes right along with it. So Marc, we probably have had a similar history to some degree. I'm just going to say, when I started out as a kid, I used to do the same thing that I bet you did. You would have like a Panasonic tape recorder. You'd go to the radio. You would record the songs. I would go and listen to Casey Kasem, Top 40 when I was a kid. Get the little microphone out. Record it onto my little Panasonic cassette deck. That's where it all started. I was totally, I'm sure Ernesto was the same, but I was totally fascinated by the fact that I could save sound on this cassette. My parents turned me onto it, and ever since I've just been captivated with it. Is that the similar kind of story that you had when you were, how did you start out for the love for cassettes?
Almost exactly the same, really. Yeah, definitely taping Casey Kasem was a big part of it. I had one of those shoebox size cassette recorders that I put next to my clock radio. Yeah. And at first I would just tape the whole show and listen to it over and over. And then eventually, when I started getting more interested in sort of the weirder stuff that would pop in there, the more left field stuff that would make the top 40, I would just wait until he starts to say that band name and then record that song. Yep. So then I could listen to that song over and over again rather than having to wait for it to come on the radio again.
I remember
that was definitely a big part of it.
But I remember sitting there. I remember my parents vividly sitting at the desk with the radio there, and I remember Foreigner Double Vision popped on the American Top 40, and I'm going, oh, there it is. Because when I was a kid, I loved Foreigner. Well, I still do like it. But it was like a big moment that I could capture it. And that just kept, as my life grew, and my dad finally bought like a really decent Marantz system. That really changed things. So we're talking 78, 79. So you go from this little crappy Panasonic unit to like a real deck.
Yeah.
That's the big time. Did you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big breakthrough for me when I figured out that, I had one of those units that was a tape player and a record player. And then I figured out how I could get a cord to come out of that and go into another tape deck. And for a brief period of time, I was like, wow, I can tape tapes to each other. And I told some of my friends at school, and they were all like, oh, you do that for me? And probably within a month of that, double dubbing decks came out. So it wasn't that big an invention I came up with. But for a little bit there, I was sort of king of the school because I could do this for people.
When I was a kid, we never had the double deck. But there were certain things, and we're going to talk about it. There were certain things that we liked and certain things we didn't. Usually we thought the double deck was kind of, I don't know, questionable. If you didn't really have a lot of money and didn't spend a lot of dough on a double deck, they shared like the same motors, and, none of the double decks they were all kind of questionable unless you spent big money. But my buddies and I, we never got into that. But I think probably it's more of a regional thing. Like, in your book, you talk about the whole rap scene and how they use cassettes. When I'm from like small town Ohio, it's a totally different thing. But I think depending on where you are in the country, it is different for you. And I think what's great about your book is that it does cover a lot of different type of aspects. So I think anybody reading the book or checking it out, if they're into the cassette thing and they grew up during that time, where they can get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most fun parts of the book. Writing the book is the chapter where I sort of go through what styles of music basically came up because of the cassette, or at the very least wouldn't have happened the way they happened if it weren't for cassettes. I mean, hip hop is a big one, heavy metal, go-go, indie rock, all sorts of scenes where the music got passed around on tapes, and the art, that's the way fans heard about it before they bought records from artists. That's the way artists influenced each other. I mean, the hip hop guys, no one was going to be putting out their records. I mean, they weren't even really rappers yet. It was all DJs at parties and stuff. And so circulating these cassettes, number one, the DJs could actually make money on it because they could sell them on the street. But number two, it just, every DJ that heard a last DJ's cassette used some of his ideas on his next set. And the styles just developed so quickly because of the music being passed around.
Here's the interesting thing that I didn't know about, but the first cassette single from the book, when I read about it, was the Bow Wow Wow.
Right.
The first cassette single. Could you believe that? I didn't know.
I can believe it.
Yeah. That's what everybody says. I mean, I've never really found complete full confirmation. I don't even know where you would find that for sure, but
that's pretty early though.
Legend.
Yeah,
that's early.
Yeah,
you know,
new
wave.
And it was appropriate band because they had a whole song about cassettes and about how they weren't buying records anymore. They were taping them off their friends. They actually had a song about that.
Yeah.
So the thing that really grabbed me when I read the introduction, the way you had written it, it made me fall in love with the medium all over again. Because the thing is, you know, like when you're in the book where you're talking about, well, chapter six really hits home with me because that's really what we did with it. And that's dealing with mixtapes and how we used them with my friends, what we did. You know, the mixtape was back in the day, in the 80s, in the 90s, was key for when you're traveling in the car.
Right.
I mean, when the CD first came out, the beautiful thing about that was, and I like CDs, don't get me wrong, but you weren't able to take anything out of the CD. You couldn't rip a CD at that time. So what we would do, have a CD, we would just record it and make mixtapes from the CD. You know?
Absolutely.
You know, when we were able to rip it, that kind of ruined it. And you kind of, you know what I mean? Because the cassette is a very romantic medium. When you make that mixtape, you put that together, you have to do it in real time. You have to think it out. The songs have to flow a certain way. If anybody's watched High Fidelity, you know what we're talking about. But that's a good example. The passion. I mean, I don't know. It just takes me right back to when I was a kid, you know? And
that's great.
But the
book,
it's
a very personal medium, very personal.
Yeah, and that's when I read your book, I just feel warm. And there's tons of great information there. Go ahead.
That's great to hear.
Go ahead, Ernesto.
The fun part was when you had the cassette in your car and you're driving somewhere, you didn't have to flip the CD over or anything. You just let the cassette, usually the tape decks have an auto reverse. So it just automatically does it.
Some of them did.
Well, some of them, the high-end ones had it. But you never lost it. You'd always be playing the music over and over and stuff, so you wouldn't have any problems and stuff. That's the one thing that stands out from my memories of being in the car and listening to tapes and stuff. But besides Walkmans. But the crazy thing about cassette dubbing and all that stuff, duplicating and all that, but I didn't realize how in Europe, it was such a threat. You know, in the British.
It was a threat here.
Well, yeah, but I didn't realize how much it was a threat over there because they didn't want nobody dubbing tapes or anything for some strange reason. They were worried that it was going to take away from the record sales, you know?
Well, I was in Mark, in the book, you mentioned how some record stores would rent records. You know, trying to get around it. We had a store in downtown Columbus, Ohio that did the same thing. And everybody I knew, they would, you know, it was just like 79, 80, 81. But, you know, they knew people were taping, but they would rent records to try to circumvent that, even though they didn't say, but you knew everybody was doing that.
Oh, for sure.
But that really triggered a memory. And I hadn't thought about that memory in years. But that was probably a normal thing that some of these record stores across the country had done to do, you know?
Yeah, which, and to their credit, that's to me a much better adaptation to the whole phenomenon than what the industry did, which was just like try to yell at their customers not to do it, which that kind of thing never works. I mean, they did the same thing with Napster, try to yell at people not to share MP3. It's just, you're not going to get consumers to help you out that way. Most people would rather do what you tell them not to do. You know? And so when the industry was like, home taping is killing music, most people are like, that's fine with me. I just want to be able to tape records. I'm not going to try to help the music industry.
Well, they didn't know what the CD was going to do to it.
Yeah. That's true.
Oh, this is great. Well, yeah, it is great, but you can make digital clones forever.
Right.
Where, you know, analog medium, it degenerates over time, the more copies you make from that source. But I do like that, the way you go into the book about, you know, it is an analog format. It's not perfect. The tapes wear out. Everybody knows that, but it's just so romantic, the way you talk about it in the book. And you have to admit, it's romantic. The cassette tape is romantic. You know?
Oh, absolutely. And not just, I mean, the way people mostly think about the tape being romantic is making mixtapes for people who you were interested in dating or, you know, had romantic interest in, which was a big thing. But there's other romance parts of it too. There's something sort of romantic about wanting to share your musical taste with people, wanting, because your musical taste has something to say about you, you know, and before you had tapes, you really couldn't express yourself through music as much. I mean, you couldn't even really take your music outside your house. And now suddenly you can make a mix of all the music you like, take it somewhere, listen to it yourself, give it to somebody else. They could find out something about you by listening to that, whether or not it's you know, a courtship ritual or whatever. Even if it's just like, I want to be friends with you. This guy likes the music I like. I'm going to tape some stuff he might not have. Maybe he'll give me some stuff that I don't have. It's just a cool way to connect with people. You know?
I mean, that totally hits home with me because I used to make these mixtapes. I had a Sanyo boombox when I was a kid. And I would make these, I would carry it around with me everywhere. Our friends, we'd hang out, we'd play all of it. I was constantly making mixtapes for well, it was more for myself, but our friends, we would all play them and, you know, enjoy it. It was a big deal. Yeah. Well, how did you come to, you've already had one book. You've had a book out prior called No Wave. This is your second book. What made you decide to go in and write about cassettes?
Well, it's kind of interesting how I got there. Like I'd always been interested in the history of it because, like you, I grew up with them. And in recent years, the music I write about for websites and magazines, some bands have started to put their stuff on cassette on a cassette again. You know, because it's cheaper, easier. It gives people something to buy from them that's not as big of a commitment as vinyl. It's faster to make than vinyl now, and so I always kind of was interested in looking at the history of it, how we got here, and how it's still a valuable thing to people. In a way, it was back then, and in different ways. So that was kind of the inspiration for wanting to write about it. And the circumstances were just sort of luck. I had been pitching an idea around a little bit, and then a friend of mine who actually happens to run a tape label, whose tapes I've written about before, happened to have a friend at this publisher, and that friend was looking to publish a book about tapes. So he connected me with him, and it all serendipity worked out really well.
Wow, perfect. Yeah. The stars aligned, Mark. Stars aligned.
Yeah, got really lucky.
But the indie bands, the Columbus bands, you can go to the record stores and they're all stocking like all the indie band stuff, and there's tons of them. All the bands are using cassette to put out new music. I don't see any CDs. I see a lot of cassettes though. A lot.
Yeah, I think the vinyl industry right now is just so forbidding. It's so expensive to make records. It takes so long. The plants are slow because they're so busy. And tapes, you can, I mean, the National Auto Company, which is one of the biggest manufacturers in America, they can send you a 500 tapes of something in like a week. You know, it's really easy and really cheap.
Yeah. And they're the only real game in town, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. There's a few smaller ones, but National Audio is definitely, and I've used them for tapes that I put out. It's a really cool place.
Yeah, I bought, they still had some BASF high bias tape that they were still spooling, and I think they've ran out of it, but I still got some. Because the thing, people don't understand this about cassette tapes. They always think, oh my God, it's going to degenerate. You'd have to bake it. Don't forget the cassette tape's made from a different formula. It doesn't fall apart like reel-to-reel tape does. Like when they're using studio stuff, it's a different formula. I've got TDKs that I've recorded off the radio, Tom Petty live on Sony D90s, play perfectly, just like it's 1979. And I still have all that stuff that I said I would record. I still have all that.
I still have tapes of my college radio show from the mid-'80s.
Nice.
that play perfectly. They sound great. My voice sounds a lot less, a lot higher, but otherwise, that's just because I was younger.
But it's
but
still
they
a
held up
great,
really well.
it's a great way to archive stuff. And, if you think it's really it's really not a bad medium at all. I think it got a bad rap because technology was changing, anything old, it's horrible. You don't want to use that. Go this way. But
Right.
there's still a lot of value to the cassette, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, I absolutely. And they even get a bad rap for how long they last. Like you're saying, a lot longer than they still can break, and they are sort of ephemeral and easy to screw up, and that's weirdly part of their charm. But they also are more durable than people give them credit for.
Sure. Yeah. A lot of but man, the quality that those TDKs, those Maxells back in the day, those shells and everything, you can't get that quality anymore.
No.
And when was the last? They quit making 2002 roughly? Was that when TDK, Maxell, they both ended tape cassette production about the same time?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
But the thing is, we're on a tangent. See, we just talk about stuff here. The thing is, that really upset me to some degree that they quit because some of the best sounding formulas came out during the later years. They kept developing the formulas. I mean, you could get normal tape that damn near sounded like high bias. It was so good. And the high bias formulas just kept getting better. It's just, who knows where they could have went. Yeah, there you go.
XL2 was the best.
But you know what I mean, Mark? If they could have kept producing,
true.
Who knows where it would have went technology wise, because it just went on a tangent,
Yeah.
There's some great stuff.
It is a shame.
Yeah. It's change. Nothing lasts forever.
That's for sure.
Here's the crazy thing. In your book, there's a couple of guys in there that are tape hunters. They're people that are going all over the world and collecting tapes of all just random music. Now, how does that fit in the book? How did you get that in the book?
Yeah, because that just seems kind of, how did that even come into play? Did you happen to talk to somebody and they said, oh yeah, there's a whole thing about people, chasing tapes.
Well, I mean, the one thing I did know from some other books that have been published in articles and stuff, that the tape culture in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s was just as big in non-Western countries as it was here, if not even bigger, because there were artists there who could not get any of their music released until cassettes came along. Because either the big labels weren't interested, or even the government would say labels should not be putting out these regional musics. They're not appropriate for the masses or whatever. So I knew that was something I wanted to talk about, but I mean, I can't I didn't have the budget to go to every country and try to research this all. Right. So I thought the best way to present this was I did know about some people who do go over there and search for these things that came out just on cassette in these times and have never really come out on other formats. So these are sort of the last remaining versions of some of this music that happened then that would never have been unearthed otherwise. And a couple of these guys have labels where they reissue some of these things, so that's kind of how I knew about them. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, they still go. It's harder to find now, but in the 90s, 2000s, early 2000s and stuff, you could go over to, say, Syria or Iran and just walk down the street and there were kiosks full of old boxes of tapes. And these guys would just go through every one and see, I think I've heard of him. This one looks kind of interesting. And they could buy a ton of them for almost nothing. And then eventually some of these guys track down the people who made the tapes to try to get their stuff reissued. Sometimes they track down an artist and the artist would be like, I didn't know my stuff came out on tape. Someone else must have recorded me and done that without me even knowing. And it's just sort of this crazy living archive of a certain type of regional music in a certain time period in these countries that cassette is the reason that it exists, basically.
You also bring up one of the chapters in the book, the whole bootleg thing. I had a buddy, or actually was a brother-in-law, who did that stuff. He was a big Bruce Springsteen fan, all on cassette. He would go to shows, record them all. I don't know what gear he had, but some of these people have pretty nice gear when they went out and did this stuff, like for the Grateful Dead shows. They had that whole area where they could record. It's fascinating. You don't hear much about that anymore, though. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think too many people do that anymore. It's definitely not on cassette. Maybe a little bit more with digital recording, but even then, I don't think it's as big a thing now. It's weird. I think going to concerts now, people have a sort of a different conception of, they want to post about it on social media to say I was there and stuff, but I don't think people are as interested in documenting it as they used to.
No.
Which is too bad, because I think that was one of the great things about bootlegging is there's all these things we have access to now that we never would have if somebody hadn't brought a tape player into the concert.
But you know what? I think it is the way culture has changed. Because you remember, Mark, you remember when you were a kid, you would look at, you hardly could get any information. I think the internet's ruined a lot of things because think about it. When you're a kid, you're waking, like I was a big Todd Rundgren fan, loved Utopia. Okay. I would look in Rolling Stone. They said, oh my God, there's going to be Utopia Oblivion's coming out. It'll be out on this day. The only way you could find out whether something was coming out is by publications, Cream, Circus, things like that. There was, especially when you're a kid during that period and you love these bands, we put these bands in high regard, like these are superstars. Of course, now I think the superstars have been replaced by game consoles. But when you were back in a kid, it was a big deal, there was that passion, and maybe that went by the wayside with, people like, oh yeah, they're playing, whatever, they don't, people, when they were recording the dead were like gods, and it's just the way things move in time and things change in culture and stuff. I miss all that though, Mark. I miss it.
I do too. I do too. I kind of miss the aspect, even though I think there's some great things about everybody having all this access. I kind of miss that whole thing where I'd read about a band in Cream or whatever, and I'd have to spend at least a few months, if not years, imagining what it sounds like, because I wouldn't be able to find it or I wouldn't have the money to buy it. And then, I'd build up in my head a lot of different things. And sometimes it would surprise me. Sometimes it was what I was expecting. But it was kind of neat to have this sort of mystery involved in the whole process,
But yeah, it's incredible.
Now, I was going to say, I think it's all visual now. It's not even about the music. It's all visuals. Everything is visuals now. If you go to a concert, it's the way they prepare the concert. They get everything ready. All visuals in that type of music.
Yeah.
But it certainly does seem like more people are interested in getting a video clip of a show now than getting a tape of a full concert.
Right. Even though it's more interesting though, because sometimes they play songs that they don't play,
Right.
So it's kind of rare.
Well, that was the big thing with the Grateful Dead for sure. That's why people wanted every show, was because every show was different. That's why there's these fanatical people who have 3,000 Dead tapes on their wall, because everyone is different.
Yeah, my brother-in-law had unbelievable. All the song tracks, like you see with all the cassette cases where, everybody's written them out, and everybody has a certain style. And he was just like that, Mark. Just like, wow, that's impressive. Because I wasn't like that. I was one of those tapers off the radio. I like to do that and make my own mixtapes. I wasn't one of those guys to go out to concerts and record stuff. Just never got into it.
No, I never really did either. Here and there, I would if there was a band I was into for a little while and I knew somebody had a tape of them, I tried to get them. I mean, when I was in college, REM was getting pretty big, and I liked them a lot. And every time they played near me, I would try to find a tape of that show. And the cool thing was they would often play songs that were upcoming on the next record rather than on the new record. And so I'd get a tape of their show and I'd hear those songs and I'd listen enough that I would know them. And the next time they play these new songs, I would know them already. And it felt like kind of being in this little club of REM fans, which obviously the Grateful Dead thing was that times 1,000,
Yeah. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. I kind of remember that too. I got turned on to REM. I used to work at a guitar store in the 80s. And I was talking to the GHS string rep, and he said, because I was into Rickenbacker 12 strings and all the jangly stuff, that whole, you know what I'm talking about. And the guy said, well, if you like that, there's a band out of Athens, Georgia. Must have been 84. There's a band out of Athens, Georgia called REM, and they're bringing back all that Rickenbacker 12 string, that jangle rock. If you're into that, check it out. And that's where that was how I found out about them. And I went and I think Reckoning had come out, and I picked that up. And once I heard it, I was hooked. I thought REM, well, I still think they're brilliant.
Oh, me too.
Absolutely stunning. But it's the same kind of thing. And then I made damn mixtapes REM in the car, for the car. I did. I used to take all what I could, just make mixtapes.
Yeah. Do you remember having those little cases like the Case Logic, I guess?
Yeah, I still have them.
Where you have some. I wish I kept those. I have none of those still.
You look now; those things are going for some money. People want them.
Yeah,
people do.
I just think that there would be a market for it. That people
do too.
But the other thing is, it's sad. I don't want to bum everybody out, but the big manufacturers, the companies that made, No one makes any decent cassette mechanisms anymore. They're all from China and they're pretty much junk. If any kids are getting into it, you really have to go through and find old cassette decks and then maybe get them rebuilt and get new belts and have them gone through, because there's not really anything for the kids or anybody to really get in. You have to use the old equipment. And that's kind of sad too.
There is the Rewind. The Rewind is the latest that's come out. Have you seen it, Grant?
No.
The Rewind?
Yeah,
that I have seen. I haven't tried one, but I saw the ad.
But I bet you that mechanism's the same Chinese mechanism they use in everything. And it's junk.
I don't know if they make it here or in China. I don't know. I don't remember.
No, but that mechanism, if you take the motor out and all that, they're the same everywhere. That any deck that you get, you look at, like, who still makes like a big dubbing deck, like TIAC or something? It's the cheap Chinese. No one makes them. Sony doesn't make them. Panasonic doesn't make them. JVC doesn't make them anymore. I don't know. I just wish.
I've gotten in the habit of grabbing them at Goodwills whenever I see them, the ones from the 80s, because you can get them still pretty cheap at Goodwills and they still usually work fine, or you can get them repaired.
They might need a belt or something, but
a
lot of those old decks, man, by the time I know, ladies and gentlemen, this is just geeky. We're just talking. There's just three guys talking. But towards the late 80s, cassette deck technology was getting so good. They were making such great decks by the 86, 87.
Yeah.
And then by the time it just petered out, you know what I mean? But man, they kept getting the gear to be better and better. And you didn't have to have a dragon. You didn't have to have something like that. You could just get like a nice, what do I have? I've got a, brain problem. What do I have?
Pioneer still made good take decks.
I have an Akai deck, a 3-head deck.
Oh,
yeah, nice. Pioneer's still good.
Nice.
Sony made good ones. I never had a problem with Sony.
Let me ask you that.
Onkyo ones with really good.
Yeah.
Onkyo's still making good stuff, like the CD players they're making. They're good. And they've been making the same damn CD player model for 15 years.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I know you have a big love for the cassette. Did you ever have a falling out, and did you come back and re-embrace it? I mean, when the CDs came out, did you embrace that? Were you a big vinyl guy?
I went in all this kind of the standard cycles. Like I had vinyl growing up, and then when CDs came along, I kind of stopped getting as much vinyl. I did get more CDs. Cassettes have always been pretty consistent. I mean, I guess I definitely have had dips where I wasn't using them as often or wasn't listening to them, but I pretty much held on to most of the ones that I really liked through life. And then, of course, the past 10 years, now that it's gotten more common for newer bands to do it, I have a ton more. But I don't think I ever had a super falling out. I mean, there certainly were times when I just wasn't doing it as much, and there were times, unfortunately, when the CD came out that I got rid of some vinyl, which I wish I hadn't done. I was assuming that CD was going to be it forever, and I wish I'd held on to some of those records. But everybody's got a story about a record they wish they held on to. I'm sure.
What goes around comes around.
Yep.
What do you think, based on your book and all your research? What do you think the future is for cassette? What do you think is going to happen down the road? I mean, there has been a bit of a resurgence. I haven't heard anything lately, but a lot of that stuff, I don't know if it's hype, but I do know whenever I go to the used stores, there are kids, high school kids buying cassettes, and they're really into it. So I look at that and I go, wow. And I always make a comment to them. I said, keep buying them. This is great. Because you can get, they're buying pre-recorded cassettes. I'm not a pre-recorded cassette guy so much, but these kids love it. They can get them for $1, $2, and they can listen to all this music they might not have ever gotten a chance to. And it's beautiful. Almost brings a tear to my eye, Mark.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is, it started out as, when it first came out, it was kind of this rebellious medium. It's like, this is the way I can tape records from people. I can make mixtapes. I can control the music I listen to.
Different now.
And I think it's different. But there's, weirdly enough, there is a little bit of a rebellious aspect to saying I'm not gonna listen to what the streaming algorithm tells me. I'm gonna listen to stuff I'm gonna still make my own mixtapes. You can make playlists on Spotify or whatever. It's not really the same thing. It doesn't take the same amount of time. It doesn't take the same kind of care.
It's got no soul. There's no soul.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think that aspect of it is really cool. The fact that I think some of the young people are realizing this might be a way to get rid of the sort of the tyranny of streaming, or not get rid of it, but rebel against it a little bit. Yeah,
Plus,
I
I
think
think
there'll always be a role for it with independent
Mhm.
music and smaller things. In terms of it being a mass medium that everybody, I don't think that's ever coming back, but that's okay.
I think
I don't know.
Walkmans are still popular. People are still buying Walkmans. I still see
Yeah,
them.
that's true.
Yeah. Well, I notice with the kids is whenever I see them, the way they talk about it is like they've got something cool to show their friends. It's like, yeah,
Right.
me and my buddies, we're listening to cassettes and it's cool.
Yeah.
You want to be a little, when you're a teenager, you want to be different from your friends to a degree. Some kids do, some of them all want to blend together. But there are
Right.
these music kids that are really into music and they just think the cassette sounds a lot better. They don't like, and ones I've talked to, they don't like the way the music sounds, the MP3s, the streaming. They want that old tape. They feel like it's almost like an archaeological find, these young
Yeah.
kids.
Oh, absolutely.
This, like, one kid said, this is like when it came out. I said, yeah, I know. I said, keep buying them because you're going to buy low. I always tell everybody to buy low. And if you can get all this music for cheap, enjoy it, take it all in. And the cassette is where it's at as far as that goes. And CDs too, because CDs are very cheap. But these kids love that cassette. I said, great. If I could work in a store and sell cassettes to these kids, get them all into it, it would be such a rush. But I'm not in that market. But
yeah, I mean, just
like
think of how much a better experience it is if you go to see a band, and as opposed, like, let's say you go see a band and they aren't selling it, you go home, you listen to them on Spotify, that's fine, I guess. But if you go see a band and they've got a cassette there, it's $5 or whatever. You can take something tangible home with you. You can listen to it by itself. You've supported them directly, as opposed to the 0.001 cent they get from a Spotify stream or whatever. It's just a much more direct way to connect with the music you like.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I'm totally a physical media guy. I don't stream.
That's great.
I want to support the artists. So
yeah,
that's me.
That's awesome.
Call me old fashioned, ladies and gentlemen.
But you're helping the artist too by buying the tape. That's another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I do. All the shows that I've been to, most of them they offer, well, some of them, what did Drive By Truckers have? I can't remember. They had their vinyl, but I think they had some cassettes, or the opening band at least had cassettes. Someone's always selling cassettes at these shows in Central Ohio. So I don't know. People are into it,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's going to stick around. It might never, obviously, will never get as big as it used to be, but I think it's going to hang around. People are realizing that it still has qualities that are valuable that not every format has.
Yeah. Yeah. Esther, you got something?
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you come up with the name?
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was kind of like I was looking for something catchier. There's a bunch of books on different parts of cassettes that have been called cassette culture. That's a title that's been used a lot, and so I didn't want to kind of replicate that. And one of the things that I always thought was cool about Blank Tapes, the one that said high bias, even before I even understood what that was, it just sounded cool. It's like, ooh, this must be a better tape, and it is a better tape. The process, I didn't even know what the process was until I started researching the book. But then I also thought it can kind of also kind of the double meaning of being like, first of all, cassettes are so personal, so there's a bias involved in anybody's experience with them. You have your own experience that's not replicated by anyone, so there's a little bias there. Plus, the way it disrupted the music industry, it biased music. It basically distorted, what the record companies were doing up to then got disrupted and distorted by cassettes. So it felt like it worked for all those kind of levels, and it's also it turned out luckily to be just catchy enough. The kind of catchy thing I can tell people. Usually people smile when I say that phrase to them. So it's worked out better than if I just called the book, the tape history or the tape cassette history or whatever.
Yeah.
No, I love the title. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, top notch. God, what else? Brain problem. Vanessa,
I'm trying to think. I have a few cassettes we could talk about. I guess.
Please. All right.
You remember that one of the cool things about cassettes was the whole put two records on one
I had that
tape thing. Yeah.
I had
twin
that
pack
one.
idea. Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. So I love that about it. That was another great thing. It's like you were paying for the price of sometimes less than one record to get two records. That's an awesome thing about cassettes.
I think MCA offered Tommy. Well, no. There was one. God, I'm trying to think. I think they had Joe Walsh like that. They probably had a lot of different bands, but Mark, I haven't seen one of those in years.
Really? That's funny.
No.
And the whole kind of things that would only come out on cassette. I know this is a Cure one. It's just a concert plus a bunch of like outtakes and B-sides and things like that. I mean, a lot of times cassettes would be something that you couldn't get on any other format, or they would be big. You know, they were kind of the bonus track thing before CDs came along, where sometimes an album would have more on the tape than it had on the record. I always thought that was really cool.
Good example. You bring up The Cure, Staring at the Sea, the singles.
That's awesome.
The B side of the cassette had all the B sides, and the A sides were, and that was the only configuration that came out on. In fact, I've got one.
Oh, that's awesome.
A cassette of it.
Yeah.
And you only could get it that way.
Yep.
But
that's what I think about all the time. I listened to that so much growing up. I had to buy a second copy because I wore out my first copy of that one.
But there are probably other examples of that. I just trying to think. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty frequent back then that the cassette would have some extra stuff that ended up not being on any other format, which was a cool way to do it.
Yeah, but what was cool about that Cure CD is that they put all the CD didn't even come close. Because they could put more on the cassette than you could on the CD.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think it was on chrome tape too.
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, pre-recorded cassettes weren't the highest quality at first, but they eventually got better and better.
Yeah, because I remember getting Bryan Adams Cut Like a Knife, and I think it was on chrome. A lot of the A&M stuff was on chrome. Police Synchronicity, which when that came out, played that to death. And I had just the regular store-bought cassette of that. Played it over and over. But yeah, they were putting out some good stuff, using some decent tape.
Sure. Look at this. Look at this tape I got. It's from Sears.
Well, Sears, yeah.
It's a 60-minute, right? It's got Star Wars on it, and it's got the original price tag on it, 99 cents.
Wow. Nice.
Evidently, they didn't come in any kind of case.
No, I took the case off just to show you. That's
so the price, they still put the price on the cassette?
Yeah, that was weird.
Weird.
That's wild.
Remember these? These were cool. Remember these?
The Memorex.
Yeah, I love that weird kind of case. Yeah.
You don't see these at all anymore.
Well, the Memorex tape wasn't all that hot, but they did get they made a chrome tape that's actually killer, like in the 90s. I think who bought Memorex? I think I can't remember. There's a Korean company that I think might have bought them, and their tape's really good. So Memorex wasn't the same Memorex later. So if you see later Memorex out in the wild used, sealed, might want to pick them up. The original ones weren't all that hot, but the marketing was great for Memorex.
When did they stop putting compact cassette on there? Remember?
That's an early one.
Yeah.
Well, that's pre my time.
Because I didn't notice that. I was like, did you say compact cassette? And then they took it out a few years after. So
yeah,
that's an early.
I threw those a licensing deal.
That's like an early 70s TDK.
Probably. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah. I didn't know until I researched this book that compact disc, they called it compact disc because compact cassette had done so well for Philips. They thought putting the word compact in it would help them sell it. Because there wasn't anything necessarily, I mean, it was more compact than an LP, but there was compact cassette originally was because there had been bigger cassettes. But there hadn't been bigger CDs. The CD was the first of its kind, but they thought the word compact was associated with something cool, so they put compact in front of disc.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So
gotta have a gimmick.
Well, Mark, what do you think was the most difficult part of writing this book?
I guess there's a couple things. I mean, it was hard to know sort of when to stop on individual things. Like with hip hop, I think you could write a whole book about how cassettes affected hip hop.
The hip hop culture.
When I had enough was kind of hard to, like, I would have been happy to spend another year just writing about that. So that was part of it. I actually found the personal mixtape chapter a challenge because all the other chapters have sort of individuals who are sort of well known in the field of like hip hop or indie rock or the guy who made the cassette or the guy who invented the Walkman. But mixtapes are the most personal thing. I mean, it's one-to-one all the way. So I kind of had to just search out. And one of the first times I've ever really done this as a writer, I even post on Facebook, hey, did you used to make mixtapes? If you did, let me know. Maybe we could talk about it. So that was kind of a challenge, but a really fun challenge. I mean, that's so much fun to talk to people about mixtapes that I'm certainly not complaining about that.
Yeah, because everybody has a different history with it.
Yeah.
You know, mixtape for some person might be something for them, and for someone else it's different. Like me, it was all about playing it on my boom box and play it in the car. We didn't really exchange them. We just all listened to them. And some people, that's all they did, exchange tapes with each other, you know?
Yeah. I mean, some people had clubs with each other where they were constantly sending back and forth mixtapes. Or they would start one and give it to the other person. They'd put some more on it and they'll get passed around. There were so many ways to do it, you know?
I think with the tapes now, I think I send Grant a picture of how now tapes, the inlays, the paper inside,
the J cards.
Yeah, they're really fancy now. They're really nice.
Yeah,
they were fancy then.
Yeah,
they're definitely.
Well, now everybody's probably. Well, yeah, but now people are probably using Photoshop. They're using InDesign, designing them, putting them on really nice, printers and everything. It's really great if you're doing it, because you can make a professional looking product.
Yeah, and it's funny how when pre-recorded cassettes first came out, they didn't really think of doing anything other than putting that vinyl cover in a square and having a bunch of white space around it and just being like, well, this is the art. We're just taking the art from the record and slapping it on the front of the tape. But eventually they got smarter about we can redesign it at a different aspect ratio with different stuff on it. I don't know if you remember this, that the Public Image Limited put out an album that was just called Album because it was supposed to be generic.
Yeah.
And so when they did the cassette version, it was just called Cassette.
Oh, I'd never seen the cassette version.
So Public Image Limited Cassette, which is cool. I mean, it's a way to adapt to the format.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a more literal way, but it's cool that people started to realize this is actually a different size and shape, and you can do different things with it artistically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole cassette and the whole CD thing. Remember when CDs first came out? Booklets wouldn't be anything. It would be like, CBS would do this, because I saw CBS designs on the cassettes. Yeah, they were very distinct with that red font. You knew what it was, but they were always so bare bones. And when they brought out the CD, CBS did the same damn thing, Mark. Very bland.
Those
virtually
red block
no
letters.
Different. Red block letters. It's like they never took these mediums seriously.
No, exactly.
They could have really pumped more into the design on stuff, because people were making better designs at their homes than they were with the I had that too on Ampex.
Oh, nice.
Look at that. You remember these? Oh, man.
Isn't that on
The
Ampex
clamshell.
tape?
Yeah. Yep. And it's like, these are so hard to find now. They're not easy to find.
No, they are. Yeah, you don't see those much at all anymore.
No, and if you do find them, they're expensive. They're not cheap.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
I had that one. I don't know where it is now though.
But
Once.
I got this for like a couple of bucks. And I had to get it because it's so old and it's vintage looking, and
that's the way it looked.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
But I don't know. The whole me buying, well, that's one thing, Ernesto, buying those, but buying sealed ones because you can get them, it's bad. I got a lot.
Yeah,
really.
Just in the archives.
That's awesome.
Well, I figure people are going to want them eventually when I can unload them.
Oh, yeah.
I still break them out and record on them, but I usually just do the normal tape. I don't dare open the high bias or the metals because those are just people are going to want those.
Oh,
there's still a lot of, ladies and gentlemen, they've made so many TDKDs and there's plenty of them out there still sealed. Look out on eBay, but get them because it's all, when they run out though.
Yeah.
Eventually all this old stock's going to run out and it's just going to go through the roof.
The price will be crazy then.
Mark said that he knew of a place that they still make them, right? They're still manufacturing tapes?
Well, National Audio will make blank tapes for you.
The machinery and all that?
Well, they recently, maybe this is a couple years ago, but didn't they formulated their own formula and they started to, so they are actually doing it. I don't know. I haven't heard any of them. I don't know if they're any good. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're making them and putting them in stores or anything. You have to go and do a special order yourself, but they do have. It is possible to get them from them, and I think you can specify any kind of length.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but high bias tape, no one makes it.
No.
Metal, no one makes metal anymore. You only can get normal, which is fine if you've got a 3-head deck and you can dial your bias in. You can make a normal tape sound like beautiful if you can adjust your bias, but you got to have a 3-headed deck.
Yeah, that's the
See how geeky, Mark, we are? I told you. I
I
told
love
you to just be geeky.
That's the best.
But I love this stuff. I love it.
Yeah, cool.
The crazy thing is, what do you think happened to all those factories that used to make the tapes back in the day? You think they just, I mean, they vanished completely, right? What do you think happened to them?
Well, National Audio actually was watching that whole thing happen and buying up all the equipment they could from all the places that were going out of business.
Yeah? Oh, wow.
So they still have a lot of their what still works, at least a lot of the equipment from those places. But yeah, most of them just went by the wayside.
I don't know what TDK did.
Jeez.
But the National Audio, they probably would buy a lot. They try to probably buy all the tape stock they could from these companies that were shutting down.
Yep. They did.
You know, because I know they ran out of their BASF high bias tape, but I've still got some sealed. And that was what, maybe 4 years ago, maybe they ran out.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
My concept of time, Mark, I can't. It seems like 4 years ago.
Especially with the pandemic included, it's just none of us know what time it is anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just phenomenal. I just hope and pray that these kids keep the flame alive for the cassettes, because that is our only hope. I feel like Obi-Wan. I mean, that's our only hope, is the younger generation taking this and running with it, and who knows what will happen in the future. I don't know. That's one of the good formulas. By the time they got to that stage, Ernesto, they were making some pretty good formulas at that point. I've got some old essays and 80, 90s, like from, I don't know, 79, 80. And you can record them, and I've got some that are still sealed. And I think I broke one open. And if you check like the older formulas of SA 90s to like the newer formulas, man, the newer ones just blow them away. The TDK was making some great stuff. Same with Maxell towards the end of the run. Yeah. Great.
Isn't that funny that it says CD on there? So they're basically saying you can take the CD on here, where Sony, the musical division of Sony, was saying home taping is killing music, but their tape manufacturers were saying tape CDs on our tape.
Yeah, I don't remember. That's funny. Man, Sony made some good tape back in the day. They're blank tapes. Great stuff. I love it. Mark, I love it still. Well, I was just talking about it. Who am I going to talk to with? I'm talking with you, for God's sake.
See, that was only 94. This is 94 minutes.
Yeah.
This one is 110.
Yeah, that's pretty long.
Yeah.
So do you think the tape gets thinner?
It is.
It is thinner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would think so.
Oh, it's thinner.
Yeah.
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 Oh, yeah, because one, I can't read it. 164 millimeter.
Well, even 90-minute tapes or 60-minute tapes are thicker than 90 minutes.
Right.
You don't really want to go beyond 90, but I've recorded on 110 and it's been okay. But I'm not out abusing it. I'm not, it just depends. You got to be careful with it. It's more fragile,
Put this in your car, man. You got a cassette deck in your car.
I do.
Do you really? Oh, that's awesome. I'm
Mark,
jealous.
come on. You're talking to Grant. Grant's Rock Warehouse. I've got a cassette, and it works perfectly.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's
the one that was in the car.
Yeah.
Was it in the car to begin with?
It's a Honda. It's a Honda. Of course, Hondas run forever. The damn cassette players run forever too.
Yeah.
It sounds great. I still make mixtapes for the car.
That's awesome.
The band Ghost put out their I don't know if it was their latest album, the one before. They put it out on cassette. I bought the damn thing on cassette. And
that's great.
National Audio, I'm sure, made them. Who else is going to make them? But I thought the tape sounded great.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's their formula that they put together, I thought it sounded wonderful. So go out, everyone, check it out. Go buy something on cassette. There are a lot of artists out there that are still putting stuff out on cassettes.
For sure.
And the crazy thing, we had these in the car, right?
Yeah.
We didn't just rely on the bass and the treble on the car stereo. We actually made the effort to put an equalizer in the car so we can get the sound, the best sound. I mean, we got into it. We really got into the detail on that, just to get that sound, because we wanted that perfect sound in the car. That was our thing back then,
Yeah.
We wanted that perfect sound.
God, we're geeky. Well, Mark, this has been a great discussion. Ernesto, do you have anything else for Mark? Because I'd like to just keep it like to an hour, and we're honing in on that.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to ask him. So how much research, I think I asked, I don't know if I asked you, how much research did you put into the book? How difficult was it?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to quantify because I started it before the pandemic and I had to take a big pause to school my kids during all that. So it's hard to sort of add it all up time wise. I mean, I started it in early 2019 and I finished the final manuscript about eight months before it came out. So like in 2022, early 2023. So yeah, I mean, it was a decent. I interviewed. I think I totaled up about 110 people for the book, and then did a lot of research, reading books, reading articles. Luckily, it was the kind of book that I could really compartmentalize because there's so many different stories, so many different subjects. So I could just attack one at a time. I didn't have to worry about how anything was going to fit in with anything else until I, finished the segments and finished the parts, and then I could arrange it and then revise it that way. So that made it a little easier. I could focus the research on individual things at any given time. So that made it fun. It was a little weird. The pandemic being a delay meant that I did have to go back to some people and be like, "Are you still doing this? Do you really still have this tape podcast, or do you really still put out tapes and things like that?" And I have a feeling that some of the things in there might be a little just slightly outdated because of that. But otherwise, yeah, it was work, but it was so much fun. It was so much fun to talk to people about. Just like we've been to, it's endless conversations like this of us reminiscing about awesome things about tapes. And I did a little book tour in on the East Coast in the fall, and everywhere just people coming up to me with their stories about tapes. It's just like tapes touched everybody, even people who were born after they started to decline. Their parents had them around, and they were fascinated. What is this, Dad? What is this box of stuff? And so everybody has a tape story. It's just awesome.
Yeah, like these, well, of course, I was a teenager in the 80s and stuff. My kids, my son was all into it. We'd go see bands like at the Newport, and they'd be selling the cassette, and he'd get it. And I got him a cassette deck, and he was all into it. So there is hope. It's nostalgic. I think, Griffin, you're listening to cassettes. He thought it was a wonderful medium. Kids seem to dig it. So there's hope. You never know what the future will bring. So Mark, how can people get your book?
Well, it's available at all regular bookseller type websites and stores and stuff. But the best way to get it, if you'd like to get it straight from me, and if you'd like to get a signed copy, is my Bandcamp site. So it's highbiasbook.bandcamp.com. So you can buy an autographed book from me there. You can also, if you're interested, I made a cassette myself that goes along with the book. It's called High Bias Music from the Book. It's focused on the last chapter when I talk about more current tape labels that I like and that I think are doing good things. I went to 12 of those labels and asked each of them to give me one track from their catalog. So it's a compilation of recent music that's come out on cassette, and it's kind of fun. And you can get a discount if you want to buy both of them together.
Oh man, can you? If I buy that, I'm gonna buy that cassette. Can you sign that? If I order it?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Because I already got the book, but we're all learning together. Had I known you were on Bandcamp, I would have bought it that way. But that's okay.
Well, and buying it anywhere is great with me.
Yeah. So I will have the link. I'll have the Amazon link. I'll put the Amazon link below. I'll put the Bandcamp link below. Everybody go check this book out. If you like cassettes, or if you're passionate, I know there's other people that are on my channel or on the Contrarians that dig cassettes. So please go check this book out, buy it, get the cassette, do it, support Mark. It's got great stuff. So based on that, I guess we can wrap this dog up. Mark Masters, thanks so much for coming on and talking tapes with us because, well, we're just geeky and we love it.
Good history.
Oh, I really appreciate it. It was really fun to talk to you guys.
That's great. So before you go, you got any other projects coming up or anything? Working on anything? Any books coming up?
Nothing huge. I mean, writing wise, I'm searching for my next book idea right now. So I'm not sure what's going to happen on that front. I do have a podcast about music books. So people like reading books about music. I talk to authors there, sort of similar kind of conversation we just had about how they put their books together and stuff. It's called the Music Book Podcast. It's got a simple title, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts or whatever, wherever you go listen to podcasts. I think it's kind of fun. And if you're interested in music books at all, I think you'll enjoy it.
Awesome. All right. More to check out.
Yeah.
All right, Mark. Thanks for coming on, Ernesto. Always fun. Mark, good
so
luck.
much.
And ladies and gentlemen, check it out. All right. If you like what you see, please like, subscribe, everybody. Check out the Contrarians. We've got tons of stuff going on over there. And check it out. And I just want to promote while I'm here. Every Wednesday on the Contrarians, we do a live show. Martin Popoff will be there. I'll be there. We'll all be doing the live show Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right now, we're just kind of looking at album covers, but we do want to hear from you. We want you to interact. Come and hang out in the chat. So we'll see you, Mark. Thanks for coming on, and good luck with any future endeavors, and buy his book.